This is a tutorial on how to configure an external drive to work with Final Cut Pro. You want to listen to this very carefully. You might want to pause occasionally and even take notes, because if certain steps are not followed correctly, you can actually have data loss. Okay, so if you're going to run your Final Cut Pro project off of an external drive, the benefit is it makes your project portable. You can go to any computer that has Final Cut Pro. You can launch your project and be off and running. The only exception to that is if you use a version of Final Cut Pro that is maybe not up to date. Most updates of Final Cut Pro recently have not been backward compatible. So, once you open your project on the newest version, you're not going to be able to open it on any version older than that. But otherwise, you can go to any computer that's got the current version of Final Cut Pro, and you can just keep working. Now, if you're going to use an external drive, chances are you're going to use something like this. This is a Western Digital bus-powered portable drive. There are many other kinds, Seagate, LaCie, I mean, there's a whole bunch. Bus-powered means it gets its power from the USB port or bus. It doesn't have to be plugged into the wall. But the little secret is that if you don't want to spend on a drive like this, you can actually run a Final Cut Pro project off of a memory card. As long as the Final Cut Pro project isn't super complex, and as long as the memory card is fast enough, make sure you get at least a class 10, that refers to the speed, or greater. And I would recommend 32 gigabytes minimum, ideally 64 gigabytes. You can actually run your Final Cut Pro project off of that card, just as you would an external drive. There are lots of vendors that sell these drives and these cards. You will obviously get your best price online, but then you have to wait a few days. Okay, so whether you're using an external drive or a memory card, the process for setting it up to work with Final Cut is pretty much the same. I'm going to use a memory card for purposes of demonstration. You start by inserting your memory card or connecting your drive. Once you do, it will show up on your desktop. We're going to go to the Go menu and go to your Applications. Go to the Utilities folder. Find your Disk Utility application. This is what Disk Utility looks like on El Capitan. Yours might look a little different. But basically, you want to find your drive or your memory card in the left-hand sidebar. You'll probably see two entries. One, the upper one, is you can think of it as the hardware, and the one slightly indented underneath, you can think of it as the software. Go ahead and click on the one that's underneath it, slightly indented. Now, we have to pause here. If you have a brand new SD card or hard drive right out of the box, you don't have anything to worry about. But if this is your personal drive that you are repurposing and you have data on it that you don't want to erase, you have to stop right here, because we're going to erase this drive. So in your case, if you have to preserve that data, you need to offload it somewhere safely. Okay, then you can bring the drive back to into this process and pick it up from here. You can erase it. Once it's done, then you can move that data back onto the drive, and it can live there right alongside your Final Cut Pro library as long as there is enough space. Okay, but the reason we're doing this is because Final Cut Pro is very particular about the format of a drive that it works with. Even though a drive that is formatted for Windows, which will say either Win or exFAT, even though that'll work with your Mac, it will not work with Final Cut. It's not fast enough. Okay, so assuming that you have a drive or a card plugged in that you can erase, we're going to continue with this process. Okay, so highlight it in the left-hand side. Go ahead and hit the Erase button. Give it a name. And under Format, make sure you select OS Extended Journaled. And hit the Erase button, making sure that you have highlighted the right volume. You do not want to erase your hard drive, which would be any of these under here for me. It shouldn't take more than a moment or two. Once it's done, you can quit out of disk utility and the drive or card will reappear on your desktop. If it's a drive, it might look a little different now that it's been formatted, but now it is optimized for speed so that Final Cut Pro can use it. It's formatted specifically for a Mac. Okay, so this is part 2 of setting up your Final Cut Pro library to be portable. Now, we'll pause here for just a second. If you have not opened up Final Cut Pro yet, you haven't done any work yet, then when you go to this home folder and look in the movies folder, you're not going to have a Final Cut Pro library file there. So if you haven't even started working in Final Cut yet, you need to do one extra step. It's pretty simple. Just launch Final Cut Pro. Just launch the application. Go to the Applications menu, find Final Cut Pro, and just launch it. And you'll see something like this. Just basically, give your library a name. You do it with a slow double click, click, pause, click. And then quit Final Cut. Okay, now you can resume this process because you've just basically created a library file in your movies folder. Once you have a properly formatted drive or memory card and a Final Cut Pro library inside the movies folder of your home directory, this is the process. You're going to go to the Go menu, find your home folder. Okay, that's your username. Go into the movies folder, and you'll see a Final Cut Pro library file. Okay, it might be called something else or even untitled or something, but it will have this 4 purple star icon here. Okay, this is the master library file. This has everything in it. It has your media, it has your cuts that you've made, all your work. This is the file that you need to transfer to your newly formatted drive or card. In order to do that, just drag this onto the drive or the card, and it'll start copying. Now take a look. This is almost a 19 gigabyte file. That's why you need the biggest drive or card available. If you buy a drive, I wouldn't get anything less than 500 gigabytes. And if you are going to run it off a memory card, I would get at least 32 gigabytes. And if you can afford it, 64 is going to be a little more safe. Okay. Once that's done copying over, go ahead and open that drive or card. Make sure it's there. Great. Now this is the file, and this is the drive that you're going to use to launch your Final Cut Pro library from now on. Okay, so when you want to launch Final Cut, just open this memory card or hard drive and double click right here to launch Final Cut and open this library automatically. Okay, but we have one more step. Now this last step is kind of an insurance policy because let's say you make a mistake and you launch Final Cut Pro before you have inserted your memory card or connected your hard drive. Final Cut Pro will not see it there because it doesn't exist. You haven't plugged it in, and it will create a new library file right here in this movies folder. Final Cut Pro loves to do that in the background, and it won't tell you it's doing that. Well, we want to make sure that doesn't happen because we don't want you accidentally using this, working off of this library file, right? You're supposed to be working off of this library file. So here's how we're going to prevent that from accidentally happening. Just back out one level. Okay, we're going to back out from movies back to your user folder. Okay, so just hit the back button. Okay, now we're in your user folder here, your home folder. And just highlight that movies folder by clicking it one time. Right-click it to select Get Info and lock that folder. Okay, click that locked button and then close that window. That will prevent Final Cut Pro from being able to create anything or use anything inside that folder. Okay, so that's it. That's the last step. From this point forward, you should be able to take your card or drive containing your Final Cut Pro library to any computer with Final Cut Pro, and you should be able to work on that computer.